Most folks, when they crack an egg, toss the shell straight into the trash without a second thought. It's garbage. Plain and simple, also we've been taught. But walk into an Amish kitchen and you'll find a bowl or a can set aside where every single eggshell is saved, rinsed and kept, not one of them ever thrown away. And it's not some quaint habit or superstition. It's because those eggshells that most folks call garbage are, in truth, genuinely useful in a whole handful of real ways, worth far more kept than tossed. And today I'm going to tell you every one of those uses, so you'll never look at an eggshell as trash again. So let me get right into it. Let me give you the heart of it first. The reason eggshells are worth anything at all, because once you know it, all the uses make sense. An eggshell is made almost entirely of calcium, that same mineral that builds strong bones and strong plants and does a great many good things. It's a little packet of pure calcium, nature's own, and most folks throw it straight in the bin. But calcium is valuable to your garden, to your animals, and more. And that's why my people save every shell, because they see not garbage, but a free and useful source of good calcium and a handful of other uses besides. Once you understand that an eggshell is really a little nugget of calcium and grit, you understand why it's worth saving, and all the clever old uses follow from that. So let me give them to you, one by one. The first and greatest use, the one that alone is worth saving every shell for, is the garden. For eggshells are a wonderful thing for your soil and your plants. Crushed up and worked into the garden soil or the compost, they slowly break down and feed that good calcium into the earth, enriching your soil and feeding your plants. And calcium is something plants genuinely need, some especially. The tomatoes are the great example, for tomatoes crave calcium, and a lack of it brings that troublesome rot on the bottom of the fruit that gardeners know too well. Many an old gardener puts crushed eggshells right in the hole when planting the tomatoes to feed them the calcium they love. So your saved crushed eggshells become a free garden fertilizer, a free source of the calcium your soil and your plants want, turning your kitchen scraps into richer earth and better harvests. That alone, that free feeding of your garden, is reason enough to save every shell you get. The second use, still in the garden, is as a barrier against certain pests, and it's a clever one. Crushed eggshells, with their sharp little edges scattered on the soil around your plants, can help discourage soft-bodied pests like slugs and snails, which don't care to crawl across that sharp, gritty barrier. So a ring of crushed shells around your tender plants is an old, free, natural way to help protect them from the slugs and snails that would chew them. Now, I'll be honest that this one works better in some conditions than others and isn't perfect, but it's a genuine old trick, a free use of what you'd have thrown away to help guard your garden. The third use is a delightful one, the eggshells as tiny seed-starting pots, and it's a favorite with the children. You save your shells in halves, the emptied half shells, and you fill each little half shell with soil and plant a seed in it, right there in that natural little cup. And when your seedling is grown and ready to plant out, you set the whole thing, shell and all, right into the ground, where the shell breaks down and feeds the young plant its calcium as it grows. It's a charming, thrifty, clever old way to start your seeds, using the shell as a free little biodegradable pot that feeds the plant besides. The little ones love it, and it's a lovely way to teach them growing and thrift together. The fourth use is for those who keep chickens, and it's a fine circle of thrift, feeding the eggshells right back to the hens. Now, a laying hen needs a great deal of calcium to keep making those strong-shelled eggs day after day, and that calcium has to come from somewhere. And where better than the shells themselves? The old folks saved the shells, crushed them up well, and fed them right back to the hens to give them the calcium they need for good, strong eggshells. It's a perfect circle, the calcium going from the hen into the shell and right back into the hen to make the next shell. Now, there's an important right way to do this, which I'll come to in the cautions, but done properly, feeding crushed shells back to your laying hens is a fine, free way to keep them in the calcium they need, wasting nothing. The fifth use is around the house, for the crushed shell makes a fine, gentle scouring grit. Those crushed, sharp little bits of shell work as a natural abrasive for scrubbing. The old trick is for cleaning out narrow bottles and jars and vases you can't get your hand or brush into. You put some crushed eggshell inside with a bit of water and soap and swirl and shake it about, and the gritty shell scrubs the inside clean where nothing else can reach. It's a clever old use of the shell as a free scouring grit for the hard-to-clean things. And there are smaller uses besides, for folks found all manner of things to do with the shells. Some add a crushed shell to the coffee grounds, for the shell is said to cut the bitterness of the brew and settle the grounds. Some add clean shells to the pot when making broth or stock to add a bit of mineral goodness. Some scatter crushed shells out for the wild birds, who need calcium too, especially the mother birds in nesting season, a kindness to the birds that costs nothing. The point of all these is the same, that the humble shell most folks throw away has use after use after use, if you only save it and know what to do with it. Let me tell you the simple routine of saving and readying them, because it's easy and worth doing right. When you crack an egg, give the shell a quick rinse under the tap to clean out the last of the white and set it in your bowl or can by the sink. Let them dry out and they'll keep just fine, drying hard and light. When you've gathered a good lot of them, you dry them thoroughly in a low oven for a little while, if you like, which crisps them right up and, as I'll say, deals with any lingering bacteria, and then you crush them. You can crush them with your hands for the garden, or roll them with a rolling pin, or grind them finer in an old grinder or a mortar, depending on the use, coarse crushed for the slugs and the soil, finer ground for feeding the hens, or the finer uses. Then you store the crushed shell in a jar or a can, dry, until you need it. That's the whole simple routine. Rinse, dry, crush, store, and it takes but a moment folded into the everyday, and it turns your steady stream of shells into a steady supply of useful crushed shell always at hand. Nothing to it, really, once it becomes a habit. Let me say a bit more about the garden use, since it's the greatest, so you can do it well. The thing to understand is that eggshells break down slowly in the soil, releasing their calcium over time, so they're a slow, gentle, lasting feeding rather than a quick one. And the finer you crush them, the faster they break down and feed. So for the garden, crush them up fairly well and work them into your soil, or better yet, into your compost pile, where they break down along with everything else into rich finished compost. For the tomatoes and peppers and the calcium lovers, a good handful of crushed shell worked into the planting hole gives them a store of calcium to draw on as they grow. Over the years, all your shells worked steadily into your soil, and compost genuinely enriched that soil, building its calcium and its health. One more free amendment from what you'd have thrown away, joining the compost and the other good things you feed your ground. It's a small contribution from each shell, but a whole household's shells over a whole year, and year after year, adds up to a real feeding of your earth for free. Let me tell you how it was in the home I grew up in, for the egg saving was simply part of the kitchen, as ordinary as the dishpan. There was always a can set on the windowsill by the sink where the shells went, and we children knew to rinse our shells and set them there, never in the trash, from as far back as I can remember. And when the can was full, the shells were dried and crushed, some going out to the garden and the compost, some crushed fine and fed back to the hens, some kept for the seed starting come spring, some for scouring a narrow jar. It was never thought about, never a special effort, just simply how things were done, for the notion of throwing a good useful shell in the trash would have struck my mother as plain wasteful, and waste was near a sin in our house. And I carry that habit still. The little bowl by my sink, the shells saved and used, and every time I set a shell in that bowl instead of the bin, I feel a small, quiet connection to that whole way of living, the wasting of nothing, that my mother and her mother before her kept as second nature. It's a small thing, but small things carry big ways of living inside them, and the saved eggshell carries the whole old thrift. And it's worth thinking on how strange it is, really, that we came to throw such useful things away without a thought. For most of human history, folks wasted very little, using and reusing and repurposing near everything, for they understood the value in things and couldn't afford to squander them. The eggshell fed the garden or the hens, the bone made the broth, the scrap fed the pig, the worn cloth became the rag and then the rug, the grease was saved, and on, near nothing wasted. And then came an age of such plenty and such cheapness that folks stopped valuing things, stopped saving and reusing, and simply threw away mountains of what still had use, the eggshells and so much more, into the bin without a thought. We became, in a way, the most wasteful people who ever lived, discarding daily what our great-grandparents would have carefully saved and used. My people never made that turn, never lost the old valuing of things, and so they saved the eggshell still, as folks always did, seeing the use in it that we were taught to forget. And in a world now troubled by all its waste, that old habit of wasting nothing looks less like a quaint leftover and more like a wisdom we badly need to recover. Now let me be the honest, careful neighbor and give you the plain and practical cautions, because there are a few real ones worth knowing to do this safely and well. The first, and most important, is about cleanliness. Raw egg can carry bacteria that can make you sick, so the shells must be handled sensibly. Rinse your shells out, and it's wise to let them dry well. And for many uses, especially feeding them back to hens or any use near food, it's best to dry them thoroughly or even bake them in a low oven for a bit, which dries them, makes them easy to crush, and deals with any lingering bacteria. Clean, dried, and where needed baked. That's the safe way to keep and use your shells, and don't go using slimy raw shells carelessly. The second caution for those feeding shells to hens is that you must crush the shells up well into small pieces, and it's best to dry or bake them first, and the reason is twofold. It makes the calcium easy for the hen to use, and importantly, it keeps the shells from looking like eggs so that your hens don't get the bad idea of pecking and eating their own fresh eggs, which is a hard habit to break once it starts. So always crush them up well and unrecognizable, dried or baked, before feeding them back. The third, and let me be plainly honest here, is about eating eggshell yourself. You may hear of folks grinding eggshell fine to take as a calcium supplement for people. Now, this is an old practice, but I'd urge real caution and honesty about it. If you're thinking about your own calcium needs and your health, that's a matter for your doctor, who can advise you properly on whether you need more calcium and the safe and proper way to get it. And I'd point you there rather than to grinding up eggshells on your own, for your health deserves proper guidance, not guesswork. So take the eggshell uses as the garden and household and animal thrift they truly are, and leave your own health and nutrition to your doctor. With those honest cautions given, let me tell you why this small, humble habit matters so much more than it might seem. For the saving of eggshells is really a little window onto a whole way of thinking. It's the spirit of wasting nothing, the same spirit we've talked about with the milk and so much else, the refusal to throw away anything that still has use, the seeing of value where the modern world sees only garbage. Most folks look at an eggshell and see trash and toss it without a thought, one tiny act of waste repeated billions of times over. But the old way looks at that same shell and sees a nugget of good calcium for the garden, a feed for the hens, a seed pot, a scouring grit, a whole handful of uses, and saves it and uses it and wastes nothing. And that difference between seeing garbage and seeing use, between wasting and saving, is really the whole difference between the modern way and the old, played out in one tiny everyday thing. And here's the deeper truth in it. It was never really about the eggshells, wonderful and useful as they are. It's about the habit of mind, the way of seeing, that saves the eggshell, because the person who saves and uses the eggshells is the person who saves and uses everything, who wastes nothing, who sees the value in what others throw away, who squeezes abundance and thrift out of the very things most folks discard as garbage. And that habit of mind, applied across a whole life and a whole household, saves a great deal, wastes almost nothing, and lives richly on little. The eggshell is just the smallest, humblest, clearest example of it. Learn to save and use the eggshell, and you're really learning to see your whole life differently, to find the use and the value in what you'd have thrown away, all through your household and your days. There's a real richness in living that way too, beyond the practical savings, a kind of respect and gratitude for what you're given. When you save every eggshell and use every part of everything and waste nothing, you're honoring what you have, treating it as valuable, refusing to squander the gifts that come to you. And there's a deep rightness and peace in that, a way of living lightly and gratefully on the earth, taking what you need and wasting nothing, that the modern way of endless waste and disposal has entirely lost. The old folks lived that way, not because they had to alone, but because it was right, because wasting good things offended their sense of how a person ought to live. And we could stand to recover a good deal of that in a world drowning in the waste of things that still had use. And let me use the humble eggshell to open a door for you, for once you start saving the shell, you'll find your eyes opening to all the other good things you'd been throwing away, and that's really the gift of it. The eggshell is just the beginning. There are the bones that make the rich, nourishing broth I've spoken of before, simmered down for their goodness rather than tossed. There are the vegetable scraps and peels and trimmings that feed the compost pile and through it, your garden. There's the bacon and meat grease, saved in a can for cooking as folks always did. There are the stale bread ends, made into crumbs and puddings and stuffings. There's the worn-out clothing, become rags and cleaning cloths and even cut and braided rugs. There are the jars and bottles and containers saved and reused a dozen ways. Once the habit of seeing use where others see garbage takes hold in you, and the saved eggshell is a fine place for it to start, you begin to notice how very much of what a modern household throws away still has real use in it, and you begin, bit by bit, to save and use it instead, wasting less and less, living richer on less, honoring what you're given. That's the whole old thrift, and it starts with something as small and humble as pausing before you throw a shell in the bin and thinking, now, is there a use in this? 9 times in 10 there is. So here is what I'd leave you with. Set a little bowl or can by your sink and start saving your eggshells, rinsed and dried, instead of tossing them in the trash. Crush them up and work them into your garden soil and your compost to feed your plants that good calcium. Ring your tender plants with the crushed shells against the slugs. Start your seeds in the little half shells. If you keep hens, crush and dry the shells well and feed them back for strong eggs. Scour your narrow bottles with the gritty, crushed shell. Scatter some for the wild birds. Whatever uses fit your life, take them up and let that humble shell earn its keep instead of filling the bin. And follow the plain cautions, keeping the shells clean and dry, crushing them well for the hens, and leaving your own health to your doctor. Because in the end, the eggshell was never garbage at all. It was only ever a useful thing that we were taught to throw away, forgetting the good old thrift that knew better. Save your shells, use them well, and you'll not only enrich your garden and feed your hens and save a bit besides, you'll be taking up that whole precious old habit of wasting nothing, of seeing value where others see trash, that lies at the very heart of the self-reliant, grateful, thrifty old way of living. If this is the kind of practical, thrifty old wisdom you've been hungry for, the kind that wastes nothing and connects you back to the good sense of those who came before, then stay here with me. There's so much more where this came from, and I aim to bring it back to you, one piece at a time. Subscribe, and we'll keep remembering the old ways together. Because some of the most valuable things we ever knew are the simple ones we let ourselves forget, and the humble old thrift that saves even the eggshell and wastes nothing at all is surely one of the most precious of them.